Every F1 season is important, and performing consistently in any sport is crucial to success. For some drivers, they arrive and show great promise, but fail to build on it. Others take a little time to find their feet, before they show their ultimate potential in an environment that suits them. However, there is no time like the present. Welcome to the 5 Red Lights F1 podcast. My name is Aaron Harper, and in today's episode I'm going to discuss who I think needs to deliver in 2022. Speaking of delivering, if you want a notification of when any of my episodes are released, follow or subscribe wherever you are listening or watching. You can find the podcast on Spreaker, Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeart, Castbox, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, JioSaavn, and of course on YouTube, where you can find lots of other F1 related videos and content. You can follow me on social media at 5_red_lights on Twitter and 5redlights on Instagram. I also have a blog which can be found at 5redlights.wixsite.com/5rlpodblog. There you can find all the podcast episodes, all my videos, and all my F1 related articles as I begin my journey towards becoming a Formula 1 writer. As I said, there is no time like the present, so let's begin with my first driver for whom 2022 is a big season. It's a big season for Charles Leclerc. There's been a bit of a trend at Ferrari, triggered by Sebastian Vettel's arrival in 2015, where the incoming driver beats the driver already at the team, and in the first season. Indeed, the same driver has then gone on to prevail in all of the various pairings subsequent seasons together. Sebastian arrived and beat Kimi, which was to be expected considering Seb was coming to win his 5th world title, and Kimi, well, it was just a hobby, wasn't it? In 2019, when Ferrari chose to partner Monegasque hot shoe Charles Leclerc with Sebastian Vettel, Charles immediately stamped his authority on the team as Vettel's confidence fell apart after his nightmare second half of 2018. In 2021, the smooth operator Carlos Sainz joined the Scuderia. He pipped Charles and former McLaren teammate Lando Norris to 5th in the driver's standings with that podium at the final race in Abu Dhabi. Now think back to 2019, Charles Leclerc inked a massive contract lasting to 2024 as the Italian team hung their hat firmly on their protégé. And Charles had some standout performances in 2021, such as the pole in Baku and his near run to victory at Silverstone, but these performances were kind of few and far between. He did run close to the front in Turkey, but then he missed out on what was likely to be a slam dunk home victory in Monaco following his Q3 crash. It's important that Charles really performs in 2022, as it's looking like Ferrari will be back at the sharp end of the grid, battling it out with Mercedes and Red Bull. And Charles has serious ambitions to be world champion, but before he can beat Hamilton, Verstappen or Russell, he first has to get on top in the fight with Sainz. And Carlos isn't going to be an easy one to topple either, because he has this incredible knack of just ticking off consistently strong results, race in, race out. It's a big year for Charles. He needs to get this right. I mean, if he doesn't beat Sainz, then there's no harm in that, because everyone knows just how good Charles can be. But is he going to be one of those that ends up missing out on victories and world championships and going down as an unfulfilled prospect within Formula 1? This could be his opportunity, the big opportunity, given the Ferrari looking much better than it has done in previous years. It's a big season for Yuki Tsunoda. Now, Yuki crashed far too often in qualifying in 2021, meaning he started far too often way down the order and out of the fight for points, really. And he lacked the consistency in races too, scoring only on 7 occasions compared to Gasly's 15 in a car that was 4th or 5th fastest on many occasions, and that just isn't good enough. We saw him have accidents as well in the races. The one that springs to mind, because I watched it recently, was the one in Saudi Arabia with Sebastian Vettel, where the move was done and Seb had the corner, but Yuki decided he didn't want to give way and ended up T-boning Seb into the barrier. Now, Alex Albon was actually drafted in to coach him in the second half of 2021, but Albon is now at Williams behind the wheel himself, so it's all on Yuki's shoulders. And he actually admitted to being underprepared in terms of fitness for 2021, joking that team boss Franz Tost was likely in better shape than he was. And I don't think that's something you should be even joking about, really, because these are professional athletes, and I get that they're young and their bodies are still developing, but they are professional athletes. Their job is to be in the best shape they could possibly be in, and Franz Tost is in his 60s. So even as a joke, that doesn't really sit well with me. It's important that Yuki delivers in 2022 because AlphaTauri are capable of challenging for a top 5 or even top 4 placing in the Constructors' World Championship, but they're not going to achieve that if they've only got one car in the fight. And Gasly, he's a talented driver, but he's not good enough to make up all the points lost by Yuki crashing into everything. And to add to all of that pressure, the pressure to deliver and score points and just generally do well just for yourself, Red Bull are a team well known for their cutthroat disposal of drivers who aren't performing. Just ask Daniel Kvyat or Pierre Gasly. It's a big year for Mick Schumacher. 2021 was always going to be a tough year for Mick because Haas openly stated that they weren't going to be developing their 2021 car, and it showed because they were way off the back at pretty much every race. While Mick would have learned a lot about how to drive a Formula 1 car, because obviously they're very, very different to anything else you'll find out there, and the way to set up the car and the tyres, how to work with them, the way they interact with the car itself. He was restricted in perfecting his racecraft and executing a proper strategy, not just battling a stray Williams or a stray Alpha and his teammate who he pretty much had covered the whole time. But we did get to see that brief glimpse in Budapest when Verstappen was coming through from damage after the red flag, and Mick got his elbows out, which was really good to see. But hopes of seeing the Schumacher name in a Ferrari anytime soon kind of put on ice for a bit because Ferrari have moved to secure Carlos Sainz after his stellar 2021 season. So the pressure in that sense could be taken off of Mick, as Ferrari won't be looking to fast track the Schumacher name into a Scarlet car as soon as 2023, like Mattia Binotto has previously mentioned. That all said, 2022 is an important year for Mick as he needs to prove that he can sustain his edge over his teammate. Now that's not going to be Nikita Mazepin. It could be Pietro Fittipaldi, who, is going to be a decent driver, but nothing really to write home about at a Formula 1 level. Maybe if it's Antonio Giovinazzi, then we might get a better read on that. But I'll talk a little bit more about the Mazepin situation at the end of this episode. Ideally, Mick gets a teammate that will provide a much stiffer test than Mazepin was likely to offer, so maybe Giovinazzi or Nico Hülkenberg if they can get him out of Aston Martin. But really, Mick's prospects could hang on his development this year and also in 2023. So 2022 isn't make or break for Mick, but it's still an important season because he's got a bit of a reputation as a second season bloomer. He won the Formula 3 title in his second season. He won the Formula 2 title in his second season. Now, I'm not expecting him to win the Formula 1 title in his second season. I think that in a Haas would be a little too much of a stretch. But it's important that Mick continues to build on what he learnt last year. And when the opportunity arises, he shows that he is capable of mixing it with the drivers in the midfield. And he got the car out of Q1 into Q2 on 2 occasions in 2021. If the Haas is, a little bit more competitive, then he needs to be sniping off a couple of opportunities to get into Q2 and start 13th, 14th. George Russell in the Williams in 2020 is the model that I really think we should be looking at judging Mick Schumacher by. It's a big season 4. Now I've got 2 drivers here, Fernando Alonso and Sebastian Vettel. Because these two are kind of at a similar stage of their career, I could have split them, but I decided that they were kind of intertwined because one's fate might influence the other. Let's see. Now, these two former world champions have both seen their stock fall somewhat since the days when they were in their prime, and they were the main suspects for winning the world championship. Alonso is without a title since 2006, and Vettel hasn't added to the 4 he won between 2010 and 2013. Last year, they found themselves battling each other in F1's midfield. Both are out of contract at the conclusion of 2022. Will they both be out of the sport? That decision, I think, is kind of twofold, because firstly, their cars need to be competitive, really to convince either driver that it's worth their time staying in the sport, but they also have to take a personal choice to continue. Fernando's already taken 2 years out of the sport in 2019 and 2020, trying his hand at a multitude of other categories like Dakar and WEC, But he also showed that the old dog still has plenty of fight in it, as he fended off Lewis Hamilton in Budapest, which effectively safeguarded Esteban Ocon's maiden F1 victory. Sebastian, on the other hand, has struggled since 2018, where everything just seemed to fall apart for him, and in 2019 it got no better. And he was let go by Ferrari before a wheel was even turned in anger because of the pandemic in 2020. And his move to Aston Martin promised much, but it was kind of severely hampered by the Aston Martin outfit's struggles with the technical changes for 2021 after being very competitive in 2020 as Racing Point. Seb is a little bit younger, so he's got a bit more time on his side, but he's got all these other interests that he has on the side. So it would be a shame to lose him because he's actually a very, very good ambassador for the sport. Fernando, well, he's under threat from Oscar Piastri, and if Alpine don't deliver, Fernando, we know what he's like. He doesn't deal with disappointing cars all too well. Just think back to his McLaren Honda days. Both of these drivers need to perform to convince their teams to keep them as well, because there are young drivers who can take their place, such as Oscar Piastri at Alpine, and even Pierre Gasly might be on the market, so Aston Martin might be looking to freshen things up with a juicy young lineup in Pierre and Lance. They also need their team to provide ample machinery and at least suggest that there's an upward trajectory for the team, because judging by the 2021 season, both teams were kind of middle of the road and not really going anywhere, both relying heavily on this year's technical changes, the drastic changes to the cars, and hoping to springboard to the front. But having seen the first test at Barcelona, Aston Martin look kind of like they're in the midfield still, and Alpine, it looks a little bit like El Plan is about to fall apart. And it's a big season for Daniel Ricciardo. 2021 was tricky for Daniel. He was outclassed on many occasions by his new teammate Lando Norris, who was just sensational. And Daniel had to battle the quirks of the MCL 35M, as his driving style was not wholly suited to that car's preferred balance. It took a little bit of a nuanced approach to having to drive it. There was that win in Monza though, where Daniel had the race under control from the beginning, and he was on course for the top step of the podium before Hamilton and Verstappen collided, so there was light at the end of the tunnel. But then that quickly disappeared because his performances in the second half of the season faded quite badly as Ferrari came on really strongly to grab third in the Constructors' Championship. And I think that makes 2022 a big year for the Aussie. McLaren themselves are convinced that the man from Perth will come good, and the all-new cars this season could certainly play into his hands, as they could be designed a little bit more around his demon braking ability and just his general feel for the car a little bit more in mind. Assuming that he gets to grips with his car, Daniel Ricciardo then has to contend with Lando Norris, the young Brit who is arguably the standout performer of 2021. McLaren have a dynamic lineup, and they also have an exciting Mexican talent, Pato O'Ward, waiting in the wings over in IndyCar. Now, Zach Brown says Pato is not being considered to replace Ricciardo anytime soon, but things can change very quickly in Formula One, and another season being comfortably beaten by Lando would see Daniel's stock slip even further. So there are the drivers that I think are on the hot seat in 2022. It's going to be a tough season for everyone as they try to get to grips with the new cars. Do you agree with the 5 or 6 even that I've suggested? Did I miss anybody out? Comment on the video who you think is on the hot seat, or tweet me at 5_red_lights, and let's debate who really is in for a big season, who needs it most. There's been plenty of news, even though there's not been any on-track action this week, and we've got testing next week, followed by the opening race of the season, so it's right around the corner. But what has happened this week is that the new world champion Max Verstappen has signed a new 6-year deal with Red Bull. 6 years! It runs to the end of 2028. He declared that staying was an easy decision, which, you know, if they're going to pay you $50 million a year, it's probably not too difficult, is it? And that probably doesn't include the bonuses and the sponsorship deals that he can throw in on top of that. So, you know, he's got some cash knocking about. The big question is Max worth it? He is the champ, and then he can command a deal that he sees as worth that. And of course, Red Bull, you know, someone is worth what they're willing, what someone else is willing to pay for them. So if Red Bull are willing to pay $50 million a year for him, then Max Verstappen is worth $50 million a year. So that makes sense, because it works for Red Bull, and they can get rid of any clauses that might see him jump to a Ferrari or get into a Mercedes. And any deal that sees Max leave the team is going to benefit them, because they've got him tied down until 2028. So even if Adrian Newey produces an absolute dog of a car in 2025, or the 2026 engines don't suit Red Bull, or they make a bit of a hash of it, Max is tied down. They've still got a really, really good driver in that seat, able to drag something out of the car. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Nikita Mazepin has been dropped by the Haas F1 team. They've elected to end their partnership with title sponsor Uralkali, as well as the contract of driver Nikita Mazepin. Now, this is actually being recorded the afternoon that news was announced, so Saturday. It was hardly a surprising decision, considering that the Russian invasion of the Ukraine and the links that are between the Russian President Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Mazepin. I do have some sympathy with Nikita, not too much, obviously, but some on a human level, because he's lost his seat due to events totally not in his control. But then he's not the first pay driver to lose his seat because a sponsor was no longer able to secure the seat. You know, it's happened before, and it will happen again. That's just the way Formula One works. He was, you could argue, and probably rightly so, on borrowed time, having survived the axe last year after his controversy at the end of 2020, and that would have been probably wholly to do with the Uralkali deal being in place and Haas needing it, essentially. Haas have done the right thing, in my opinion, for separating themselves from the brand and the driver, and I'm hoping really that Gene Haas steps up his game in terms of funding that team and or finds a more appropriate sponsor for the team, because otherwise they're just going to drift, and then you run the risk of not just the drivers but team management becoming unhappy, or mechanics moving on, and designers. People don't want to come to a team that's not being given opportunity by the people above it. You think about it in football. If you've got an owner who's starving the club of money, players don't want to go there, managers don't want to go there. It just makes life more and more difficult. So Gene Haas, he needs to watch his step, because otherwise that team is just going to end up cut adrift from everybody else. Now, who replaces Nikita? Well, if the Haas F1 social media post is anything to judge by, then Pietro Fittipaldi will be returning to the seat, but in a more full-time role after filling in as Romain Grosjean's replacement at the end of 2020. That choice would make sense, because the other option, Antonio Giovinazzi, arguably the stronger driver, would likely take some getting out of his Dragon Penske Formula E contract, where he has been completely Giovinazzi and there, but also not there, because he's been last. Pietro is probably the better choice, because he's familiar with the team and he can bring some backing from Brazil. Also, you could technically class him as an American driver on the grid, as he holds dual nationality for Brazil and USA. Of course, the last Brazilian driver to be full-time on the F1 grid was Felipe Massa back in 2017. So it's been a bit of a wait for Brazil to have a driver to cheer for. But if we have Pietro Fittipaldi in the car and we go to Sao Paulo, well, he's going to get absolute partisan support there. And one final piece of news that kind of piqued my attention was that Aston Martin are considering building their own power units when the new engine rules are put together for 2026. And now obviously Red Bull have created Red Bull powertrains, although we all really know it's just a Honda. With the new power unit designs being discussed ahead of 2026 being quite integral to that for Red Bull. And now it also seems that Aston Martin are having the same thoughts. Volkswagen, the VW group, have been touted as entering with a power unit or as a team, but that's been knocking around for the last 20 years, really. But Aston Martin have gone on record saying that they too are considering their own power unit. Technical Chief Andy Green has said that, I think going forward with our ambitions, we're definitely investigating our power unit supply in the long term. So read into that what you will. Maybe they're looking around, but they're definitely looking at the consideration of making their own engines. Now that's all for this episode. If you want to find more from me, you can catch up with all the 2022 season episodes, including my predictions and a chat with George Howson and Tom Downey about Mercedes and Red Bull this year. Check out the YouTube channel for more F1 content, such as the Flying Lap, where I recap the action quicker than the pole position lap time. And you can also find me on the Formula 1 Grid Talk podcast. Just search Formula 1 Grid Talk. I will be a panellist on there over the course of the season, giving my thoughts and reactions to qualifying sessions or to the race. You can also find me on the aforementioned Twitter and Instagram, and check out my blog. I've put up 3 articles, and I'm starting my writing course this coming Thursday, actually. So that will do for this episode. Thank you for listening or for watching. Enjoy the racing, and I will see you when the 5 red lights go out.